Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
I want to start this week's episode with some questions. Questions that I get asked often, especially from newer clients. And they go sort of like this. How can I get my team to take more initiative? Or is there a way to get my staff to take on more responsibility? Or I might get something like, how would I get my staff to care more about the practice? I mean, look, there's a number of different ways that question might be asked, but conceptually, they're all the same. So this brings us to the point. How do you go about doing those things? And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. Specifically, we're going to cover 9 ways to improve employee initiative and responsibility. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And I want to start off this week's episode by bringing us back to the mission of the podcast. Specifically, look, we do a ton of training here at MGE. We teach you to create a whole system in your practice for hiring and management and efficiency, et cetera. And that could take months to learn, and you should. It's the way to have long-term sustained success. But the mission of this podcast has been to give you something that you can start applying right now. You've listened to it today, and you can start using it in the office. So we're not going to solve all your problems in this podcast, but the idea is that the points I'm going to cover are things that you can implement right now to improve employee initiative, responsibility, performance, efficiency, and employee retention. So let's just jump right into this. Let's have a look. So what's the first thing you could do to improve employee initiative? Well, I mean, this may sound kind of stupid, is you could ask them, actually have a conversation. It often shocks me how not in communication people are with their team. They have a quote unquote professional relationship, which I agree you should, but they don't talk to their team. They don't really talk to them. They don't really exchange ideas. It's all very, very sterile in a way. Have you ever sat down? Let's say you have somebody and you want them to take on more. Have you ever actually had a conversation with them? Hey, I'd like you to be able to handle this, or hey, I'd like you to take on more ground from your position. I'd like you to be able to handle this for me as well. You'd be surprised. Most people, despite whatever bad experiences you've had with employees in the past, most people are very cool and they want to do things like this. Now, there are a couple qualifiers with this. You don't want to ask somebody to do something that they're not really suited for. Let's say you have somebody who's a really good bookkeeper. They're very high attention to detail and they don't make mistakes. And you can't see this person selling. They just don't have that makeup. And that being said, you can teach everybody to do that. But let's say this isn't what they're inclined to do. They don't want to do it. I wouldn't turn that person into my treatment coordinator. So I wouldn't say, hey, I want you to start becoming my treatment coordinator. You want to make sure they're suited for it. But assuming they are, it's not difficult to get someone to take on more just by asking them. And maybe you want to have some type of reward attached to it. Like, look, if you handle this, you can make this, some extra money, or there's an incentive associated with it, or something along those lines. Which brings us to the point, what are you moving them into? Which is the second point I'd go over as far as how to improve initiative and responsibility. And it has to do with division of labor. If you look at the conventional front desk in the average dental practice, you might have 2 or 3 people up there. You don't have a specific division of who is responsible for what, and that creates a problem in a number of ways. I've talked about this before, and we talk about it a lot in the MGE program. But if I have 3 people at the front desk and there's a hole in the schedule and nobody's really responsible for anything, they're all doing a little bit of everything, scheduling, checking patients out, filing insurance, following up, verifying information. But nobody's responsible for any particular one thing. If I have a big opening in the schedule, who do I talk to? It's not that they don't want to be responsible, but they just aren't. I haven't made them accountable. So even if you only have 2 people up front, you could divide the labor a little bit, and then you make them responsible or accountable for those specific things. Even if one of those people are your office manager. They could be the office manager and they're also the financial coordinator. And you might have another person up there who's the scheduler and the receptionist. Right? You might have a hygienist, and you said that your hygienist is in charge of your hygiene department. The idea is if somebody doesn't have an area of responsibility, an area of the organization that they can call their own, you can't then lay expectations of growth or things that you want handled in that area. It's impossible. You can't go to the front desk and say, hey, the 3 front desk people, hey, I want to collect an extra $20,000 this month. They may go okay and they may be on board with you, but who's responsible for collecting that $20,000? All of them? I mean, I ask this question at seminars all the time, but if everybody's responsible for something, who's actually responsible? And the answer is always nobody. Well, there you go. So you want to divide labor. So a person should have a specific sphere of activity that they are responsible for. And mind you, they're responsible for the good and the bad. So if I'm your financial coordinator, and let's say you're averaging 100,000 in collections, and I collect 130 this month, well, obviously I'm going to want to make sure you know that. You probably already do, but I'm going to make sure you know that because I collected this. Look what I did. But then you'll notice this at times, and this is sort of a human nature thing. Let's say you're averaging 100. I collect 130. Obviously, I'm right there. Hey, look what I did. But then the next month we collect 70. So you come to me. Hey, what happened? Oh, yeah, people don't want to pay. It's tax season or, holidays or, in other words, the responsibility is over there. It's not with me. And this is sort of human nature. People are happy to take responsibility for things when they're good, and when they're bad, then you get the blame game starting and it doesn't quite work out. The point being is being responsible means you take the good with the bad. Doesn't mean I sit there and I go, oh, I'm a terrible person. It does mean that I look at it and I look at how can I fix that? Okay, we did 70 this month. Here's what happened. Here's how I'm going to make sure we do 120 next month. So that's the second thing you want to do. Obviously, you ask them first if you want them to take more responsibility. But the second thing is they have to have something they're responsible for. All right. And they're responsible for the good and the bad, which brings us to how do you actually rate their performance? And that's the third thing, which is they need a statistic. All right. They need a statistic. Now, you've probably heard of the idea of managing with statistics, managing by statistics. We teach it very extensively on the MGE program. Most people think that managing by statistics is graphing your statistic, which is good, but you're supposed to do something when the graph acts a certain way, if the stats are going up or down. But a person's statistics should represent their productivity and what they do. That's important. So, for example, and that's where you want to be sensible if you're giving someone a stat, okay? So let's take someone like your scheduler, for example. So what statistic would you give it? We've taken somebody, we've made them the schedule coordinator. This is their area of responsibility. We say, good, here's your statistic. And with that statistic, we want to see, are they doing a good or a bad job? So what statistic are we going to give them? Now, there are a couple of ideas out there. There's one that I really don't like, and there's one that I do like. I'll tell you the one I do like first, which is production. I think production is the statistic you should give them because that's what you want. Why do you have a scheduler? So that your schedule is filled productively and efficiently. And if it's not filled productively and efficiently, why do you have a scheduler? You should get another one or teach them how to schedule, right? If I've seen the statistic percentage of appointments kept out there, which to me is more of a nice thing, okay, they're at 90% appointments kept or 95%. It's a good piece of data, just like how many hours you were open today. That's nice, but that's not something I'd really go crazy statusizing. The problem I have with percentage of appointments kept is, let's say there are 10 patients on your schedule today and one cancels. And then the scheduler goes and gets 2 people to fill that slot. All right. So we had 10. We lost 1, brought us down to 9. Then they find 2 other people to fill that slot. Well, they're at 110% today. They got 110%. Well, here's the problem. What if that tells you nothing about quality? What if that one that canceled was you're replacing 3 implants and they replaced it with a denture reline and a composite? That doesn't really help you in the long term. Sure, they're at 110%, but that doesn't really work for your practice long term. So yeah, you can keep that statistic if you want. We have clients keep it, but to me, that is not the managing statistic of, for example, a scheduler. Same thing with a hygienist. There's production for a hygienist. For a financial coordinator, it might be collections percentage or collections. The idea is the statistic should represent what the person actually does, because the idea is if you have a, let's say, scheduler and your production continuously is going up and the schedule is being run somewhat intelligently, well, then that's a scheduler that you would want to retain and compensate more and so on. Whereas if they have this 110% percentage of appointments kept statistic, and meanwhile your production is declining over time while your costs are going up, that doesn't really work. So that stat, you have to have an area of responsibility, and they have to have a stat that actually represents what it is that they do. Now, what I've done in one of our seminars, we cover different types of statistics, and there's a lot to this seminar, but I decided just as a download, if you want to get an idea of a few stats that you should be keeping in the practice, on the episode webpage, we have a download for statistics to keep. If you want to check it out, you can download it, and you can look at that for your practice. If you have questions, you can always go ahead and email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. Second aspect of statistics is there's the overall performance statistics of the practice. Now, I've talked about, should you share your numbers with a team? I'm a big fan of doing that with certain numbers. I wouldn't be sharing profitability and things like this because that can spin out of control real fast. But I would share production and collections, and obviously they probably already know new patients. But the reason why I like sharing the numbers with the team is they see if the overall practice is growing. So I think that if they have an idea of, is the practice growing? Is it collecting more? Is it producing more? Are we helping more people? That's good because that shows the, end result of their overall efforts. It allows them to share in the success. And where I see people leery of this is maybe they've had an employee or two who said, you just care about the money or whatever, which is not true. I mean, sure, you got to make money, but you're not just there for the money. So don't let that one bad experience sour you on this. This is not a good thing. There's nothing wrong with having a productive and highly viable practice, right? And this way also, if there's overall incentives associated with collections for the practice, they know what it is, so they can help move that along. And I'll talk about that in a future episode, bonus plans and things like this as far as setting them up. All right. Next point is you want to make sure that your employees know that they don't just have a job. In this environment, especially, the employment market is crazy right now. Inflation is, I hate to be like all the hyperbole that the media does, but it is a little slightly off the chain. I did an episode not that long ago about inflation being at 7.5% year over year in January. I'm doing this episode on March 10th. And the report came out this morning. I think it's at 7.9%. I think that qualifies as off the chain, but I could be surprised. Could be worse next month. So you got a shortage of employees. There's more people looking for employees than employees looking for work, and you got inflation going up. So you'd think that it's all about money for people. And obviously money is part of the equation, people do have to make a living, but that isn't the only reason people are there. People don't just work for money. It becomes a drudgery after a while. And I know plenty of people who are rich as you could imagine. And they're some of those, not all, some of them though are the most miserable people you could ever meet. It's pretty bad. People need a mission to sort of keep them going. They need to know that they're actually making a difference and helping. So your team needs to know what the mission of the office is. And if you don't have one, you need to figure out what it is and make them know it. Get them to know it. How are they making people healthier? How are they improving people's quality of life? That's one of the cool things about dentistry is that it does improve people's quality of life, and it also contributes to better systemic health. It improves people's longevity. They could live longer if they have a healthy mouth. That's something people should be thinking with all the time. And what it does, when you're scheduling somebody or you're collecting money, closing a case, etc., obviously there are the mechanical aspects of doing this. You have to, do financing, and you have to get the person to sign this and agree to this and agree to that, and it goes on the stat graph. We collected this much. Those are all the mechanical things. That's the what and the how of there's what, how, and why, right? What am I doing? How am I doing it? Why am I doing it? So the what and the how would be, I have a patient do this and they sign this and we collect that money. That's the what and the how. And obviously people need to know those things. But the why is extremely powerful. Why is this important? Why is it important I make sure that this patient gets this treatment? Why is it important that I make sure they show up for this appointment? Because if I know that that actually is connected with improving their quality of life and potentially their longevity, that makes it a lot more important that they show up and they don't cancel and that I make sure they get this treatment that they needed. And it's true. That's the best part of this. So you should make sure your employees are thinking with that, and especially when things go right with patients, which happens a lot, You place some veneers, a patient's super happy, a patient couldn't eat, they had hardly any teeth, and you did an all on 6, and now they're super happy. The employee should know about this, the changes that they're making, not just the one person who checked that patient out that day, but everybody should know about it. Something you would want to share in staff meeting. So The next point I'd do or put a focus on would be training, or really what we're talking about here is education. Now, a couple things on this. Everybody wants to train their team, teach them how to do things, make them more efficient, better, etc. So let's look at a couple aspects of this. First off, training is actually a benefit in your practice. If you're offering any kind of training that actually increases their ability, that is a benefit. That is not a drag. That's not, oh, I have to do training now. Unless the training is stupid. My father-in-law was in the software industry right before the dot-com bubble. And he went to a team building retreat one weekend, and one of the exercises they had the employees do is they laid down in a line. They laid down next to each other in this big long line, and then one person at the end of the line had to roll over everybody else. Supposed to be team building. He thought it was the dumbest thing ever. But the point being is that I'm not even evaluating whether that was good or bad, but here's one of the participants who thought it was stupid. That's not worthwhile education. The education actually has to improve their ability. So it also improves their marketability. We have people who have done the MGE Office Manager program, for example, and they'll put it on the resume, and that makes them very desirable as a hire. We've had clients call us, hey, this person says they did the Office Manager training program. Do you remember them? Oh, yeah, they're a great student. That makes them a better hire. We've also had some say they've done it when they actually didn't, but that's, a whole other thing. But training should never be a drag. If I have to, it should make people more efficient. It increases their individual marketability. It's things that go on their resume. It improves their performance. It has to be workable. If I have an employee that doesn't want to improve their education or get better at doing something, that obviously would hinder their upward mobility, not because I'd want it to, but I need them to learn more if they want to take on more responsibility. And if I have somebody who's just anti-learning something, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your employees, and obviously you should always have an employee attorney. I'm not giving you any recommendations like that. I am not one. But if I had somebody who just does not want to get more educated or can't or won't train, that's a big red flag for me, because otherwise, how are they going to learn anything new? Things are changing all the time in business, ways that look at the way we're doing things now, even versus 2 or 3 years ago. If someone doesn't want to learn new things, they're going to be a bit of a problem. And this would apply to your technical staff as well. You can have courses, different types of certifications for your dental assistants, your hygienists, etc. And look, if you're going to invest a lot of money in training somebody, you could always talk to an employment attorney and draw up some type of a contract. I'm not saying that you can do this or can't. Obviously, this is you and an employment attorney where they agree to work with you for a certain length of time before they split, which is one of the reasons and one of the negatives of training that I've heard before, which is, I don't want to train this person and spend money on them and then they just leave. Look, that's always a risk. People may leave. That's why if you're going to invest a sizable amount, you might have some type of an agreement in place. But if you're not training employees or educating your employees because of that factor, you're never going to go anywhere. You have to increase your employees' ability, and that's one of the keys. All right, next point is, and just last thing I'll say on this whole training issue, you can do some of the silliest, easiest things to improve efficiency in your office that you could be doing today. Like, let's say you're having trouble with the whole new patient onboarding process. They come into the office and then they get their exam and you draw up a treatment plan and they're supposed to come back for some type of a treatment presentation and they don't show up. You could walk through that process with your employees, with one of them pretending to be the patient, and you could find out where that's bugging up. You spend an hour doing that. You allocate some time in the office to do it, and you'd be surprised at the amount of change you can make. We have our online training platform, DDS Success, DDSsuccess.com, where we have training for the financial coordinator, the receptionist, the scheduler. Simple things like that can make their job a heck of a lot easier, and they're not super expensive. And you can always invest in training with an employee on a bit of a gradient scale. You can spend a little bit at first and a little bit more when they've sort of proved their mettle. Obviously, I'm not going to use training as a solution for someone who's completely non-productive, because remember, training is a benefit. But if someone's maybe having trouble with a particular area, then let's get them educated on it. Which brings me to the next point, which is expectations. I find this to be wildly missing, and it sort of ties back into how I started this episode, how I find that sometimes employers don't really talk to their employees. When you hire somebody, or when you're talking to an employee, how clear are you making your expectations? And by that I mean, so let's say I've hired a schedule coordinator. Am I really explaining to them what that should look like for me. Well, here's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting you to schedule this much per month in production. I'm expecting the schedule to run like this. I'm expecting this. I'm expecting this with the treatment coordinator. I'm expecting to be able to pass the case over to you after I've mentioned the cost, and you're going to take them off, and you're going to get 80% of those patients to pay based for the whole treatment plan. Like, are you laying out expectations to employees so that you can actually gauge whether they are meeting them or not? Because if they don't have clear expectations, and maybe you do have clear expectations, but you haven't shared them, well, then those expectations don't match. And that can cause problems. I'll tell you where I see this quite often is with associate hires. Let's say you've hired an associate. Maybe this has happened to you as an associate. If there's an associate listening, I'd recommend that you make sure you do this if you get into this type of situation. But let's say you hire an associate and you go, hey, if this works out, maybe we can talk partnership. All right, that's very nebulous. That seems pretty cool. Well, you haven't really explained what has to happen before the partnership communication can commence. How much time should pass? How productive should this associate be? What is the associate going to pay in order to gain partnership? So you haven't spelled those things out. And because you haven't, the associate has one idea of what it means, and you have another. So then let's say 6 months go by, and in the associate's mind, that was how long they needed to be there successfully before partnership talks could commence. For you, it was a year. So then one day the associate asks to have lunch with you or talk to you after hours and says, hey, I think we can start talking partnership now. This is working out really well. And you're, whoa, wait a minute. What are you talking about? I was thinking more like a year. That's when the conflict starts. That's when the problems start. And I've seen too many potential good partnerships break up because they didn't spell this stuff out in the beginning. I've seen it happen with employees as well. You haven't spelled out expectations. They don't know what you're expecting. So then they're going to try. Most people, again, are good people. So they're going to try and deliver what they think you want. But if you don't tell them what you want, how do they even know if they're doing it? One key with expectations is they have to be realistic. And this is sort of a leadership lesson in a way. Some of the better executives I've worked with, and I've always operated off of this policy, is I will never ask somebody to do something that I myself would not do myself. So in other words, if I tell somebody, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, I have to know two things. One, that X, Y, and Z is possible. And two, that I would do it if I had to. That's important. If I'm asking somebody to do something that I would not do or think could not be done, then that's just extremely poor leadership. Very poor leadership. Do not ask somebody to do something that you think either can't be done or you yourself would not do. So you have to have an idea of what is realistic. Let's say you've got 3 doctors and 6 hygienists and 8 assistants. And you got one person at the front desk, and you tell them, I want everybody booked. This one person. Book everybody solid. They're probably not going to be able to do it. You're like, oh, my front desk is horrible. Well, no, they're just completely overwhelmed. So you have to have an idea also from a business perspective, what is possible and what is not. Now, a lot more may be possible than you think. But this tells you also have to understand your business very well, because when you don't understand your business, this is where you get yourself in trouble, how things work and how things are done. So that's another thing. You have to understand not only what your employees are going through, you have to understand what's realistic, and you have to understand the business. Whether you like it or not, you own the business, so you have to understand things like this. And one thing I would sort of wrap this up in, these things that I've been talking about, stats, expectations, the mission, etc. Ideally, all of that would start at the beginning of the interview process. Because then if you do that, if you sit down with somebody and you say, okay, good, this is what I'm looking for, this is how much it pays, these are the hours, these are the responsibilities, this is how I'm going to rate your performance, this is how you would get a raise, this is the mission of the office, I'm expecting you to do this training. You're doing all of that right in the beginning, in the interview process. If you're doing that, if I have a problem, let's say you're interviewing me, if I have a problem with any of the issues you've brought up, well, that is thrown on the table right then and there. You don't waste your time. You don't hire me to find out a month later that I don't want to do that education you want me to do on X-ray certification. You find out now, or, I don't want to work one Saturday a month. You find that out now. So all of this, or I didn't think I'd have to schedule everybody. You want to find that out now before you hire me. That should absolutely be part of the hiring process. It should be part of whenever you interview. You can almost make a little checklist. I'm going to go over all these points during my interview and see how the person reacts. But you'll also find some people who, wow, that's awesome. I really love this. You'll have somebody who really latches onto this stuff. Maybe somebody that you maybe wouldn't have connected with, but then you bring up the mission of the office and they get pumped about it, and this turns out to be a good employee. So that's something I would do in the beginning. It eliminates a lot of surprises. Between this and having a workable system for growth and expansion with ambitious people contributes to retention. That's the other side of it is if I'm hiring ambitious people, I have to keep the office growing because, they want to move up into other things, right? So I want to make sure that they know from the beginning, this is what I'm expecting, this is where I'm going, we're growing, etc. And then they know what to expect from day one when they walk in. Those are the main points I would do during the interview process. The last couple points I'll go over here, since I promised you 9 points, sort of rounded out here. Last 2 points I'll cover is one thing that I find people don't do enough. We're very quick to point out when someone screws up, but we have a tendency not to validate, acknowledge when somebody does a good job. I've been guilty of that before as well. And I would make a point of this. And the idea is not to make it weird or whatever. It's just to show people that, hey, you scheduled, let's say you have a scheduler and they beat their target this month by $20,000. Point out, wow, you really killed it. This is really awesome. Thank you. So that they can at least see, they worked hard to create that effect. And you want to acknowledge that. And that just further acknowledges that they created that effect. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it validates their importance to the team. And the last point I'd go over as far as, with employees, how to get them to take more responsibility and accountability as well as improve performance is you have to nip problems in the office in the bud. You nip it in the bud. You don't, it comes from gardening, right? You want to nip it in the bud so it doesn't grow back. If you have staff conflict going on, if you have a non-productive personnel sitting in the office causing problems, you need to handle these things fast. You need to handle them quickly, especially let's say you have staff conflict between, your dental assistant and the scheduler, and it's just going on and on and on and on. You go, I'm not going to get involved in this. It's not my problem or whatever. Eventually, this is going to be your problem. You need to get in there and iron that out, and it is going to lower overall office productivity and morale. Worse than this is, let's say you have somebody who's just not productive. I want you to imagine any type of a team activity, which is, you're in a service business in a dental practice and you operate as a team. But any type of a team activity requires individual contribution from the individual team members, which equates to the whole team, over outcome. Kind of liken it to a tug of war. So let's say there's 6 people on one side of the rope and 6 people on the other. You're on your side with your other 5 people with you. The idea is that in a tug of war, everybody is pulling as hard as they possibly can. Some people pull harder than others, but you're expecting maximum output and effort. All right? So if you have a non-productive personnel, someone who's just really not doing what they're supposed to do, that's sort of like having, you have the 6 people on your side and 5 of them are pulling hard and the other one is really not pulling all that hard. Or maybe they just have a cup of coffee and they're looking at the rope and twanging it. Right? Twang, twang while they drink their coffee. Or maybe they're pushing when they're actually pretending to pull. That can get real bad. But the bottom line is, don't think the rest of the team doesn't notice that. So now that creates a problem for your team. Now, if your team really wanted to take full responsibility, they would make sure that this personnel was handled somehow. They're told they need to get their act together or they need to leave. Most people won't do that because they don't want to get somebody else in trouble. But I want you to take a look at the message you're sending for a second. Let's say you have a hygienist. They're not very productive. They're nasty to the rest of the other staff. They don't help you present treatment. The patients don't particularly like them, although the hygienist is going to tell you how much the patients like them, that particular one. And you go, well, it's tough to find a hygienist now, so I'll just have to, deal with it. Well, what message are you sending to the team? There's a couple messages. One, you're not protecting them at all. It's okay for this hygienist to act nasty to them and not be pulling their weight compared to the rest of the group. That's the first message you're sending. And 2, the message you're sending is that kind of behavior is okay in this office. That's okay. It's okay to be rude. It's okay to be choppy. It's okay to blow up at your fellow team members for absolutely no reason. That's fine. So by sending that message, you create a problem, because then when, your receptionist gets upset and starts blowing up and you tell him or her, why are you doing this? Well, the hygienist is doing it. It almost creates, I'm not trying to be too facetious here, but it creates a staph infection with 2 Fs that starts to bleed around the office. So as the executive, whether you're the office manager or the doctor, you can't let somebody sit there without some type of action being taken if they are not doing their job. You're sending, not only is it bad for the office, not only is it stressful for you, but it actually poisons your other team members. And most of them are too nice to say anything about it. You have to handle it. You have to confront it. And by the way, this also applies with patients. So if you have a patient who's nasty, rolling over your team, etc., that creates a toxic environment. That should not be allowed. That patient needs to be spoken to, and they're either going to shape up or you might have to dismiss them. And again, that's up to you. Talk to your malpractice carrier. You have dental practice acts, etc. All of this stuff, you have to decide what you're going to apply and what you're not. But these contribute very heavily to office environment. Okay. And if you lower the overall outlook in the office environment, you make it sort of down and upsetting and nasty, it makes it difficult not only to get new employees, but to retain the ones that you already have, because then work just becomes a drag. So sure, you don't want to deal with letting that hygienist go, because even though they're a huge problem, but don't be surprised when your scheduler takes another job at an office down the street where they don't have to deal with someone like that all day. This can save your office. So just something to look at. Don't mess around with it. And also, this applies to you too. You can't be nasty when it's not warranted. You have to look at how you handle people as the boss. You have to hold yourself, if you're going to hold people to account, you have to hold yourself to the same or a higher standard. You see, if you're going to give a person a hard time about being late, you can't be late. You have to look at how do you handle people. If you snap, I've seen, this wasn't a client in particular that I'm thinking of, but I remember, going into this doctor's practice. I've been into over 1,000 dental offices and small businesses across the United States, as a consultant. And I remember going to this doctor's practice and finding that they threw things at the assistant, and they yelled at the assistant because they ordered this, to give you an idea how long ago this was, the wrong X-ray film. This is a long time ago, or a wrong X-ray developer or something. But his staff did not look good, meaning they didn't look really happy to be there. But so you look at how this guy went around handling his employees, that's just not good. That is not a good environment. So you have to make sure when you look at how you handle other people, would you be okay being handled that way? And if the answer is no, then there's maybe something that you have to change. Because ultimately, all of these things I've mentioned in this episode, you're in a service business. A large part of this is your team. They are one of your practice's most valuable assets, and you can't ignore them. So, that pretty much lays it out. I hit the 9 points in detail. I hope that helped. And obviously, look, as I mentioned, the training we do at MGE, to give you an idea, like a client will do 11 days of training on statistic management. We do a lot of training on this subject, a lot of education, so that we create a doctor who really knows what they're doing when it comes to managing a practice. And if you really know what you're doing, it gives you a degree of, you feel like you're in the driver's seat. You don't feel so at effect of what's going on around you. And that's definitely something, if you want that, I'd recommend that you look into it more. We do a free consultation. You can find out more about it by clicking the link on the episode webpage, or you can visit us at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. And I have that stats download up there for you too, if you want to check that out. That's all I have for this week, folks. I hope it wasn't too much. I don't know if I exceeded my half hour. I think I did. So it was practice success in 35 minutes or less this week. Sorry about that. But I wanted to make sure that I covered all the bases. I hope this helps, and we'll see you back in the next episode.